Oh, there we go. There we go.
It's about 4:33. I'm standing in for John today to call this committee of the whole meeting to order. Jim, it is all yours.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Appreciate you taking time out of your afternoon, especially on our long day. Tuesdays is the city's long day twice a month on the first and third Tuesdays.
Is your mic on?
Yeah, it is, but I don't know if it's going to pick me up because I'm not going to hold it, so we'll do our best. What's important here, and what I want to share with the group, particularly with the new folks, that number one, if you guys have a question too, since you're running and some of this stuff is new to you, I think it's okay if you just give me a signal or ask a question. I'm okay with that because anybody else wants to ask questions, that's fine too. I just want to keep the flow going on this. There are a couple different touch points that I have with the legislative body, the city council, that are very important. They become very important when we're issuing debt. And that is primarily when the two big ones are the mid-year review and this pre-budget meeting, and then our actual budget process is huge. And then we used to do a separate debt meeting, but our debt is so low right now that hasn't been necessary, and it would be a very short 5-minute meeting. But those touch points score us for the informed management portion of our bond rating process. So that's fairly important in terms of what we do and where we're going. So I appreciate everybody being here and the opportunity to do this, and especially under the committee of the whole setup. That being said, 2026, we talk about this every year, and it's good to reinforce what does it mean to be healthy financially. It means you need to have healthy reserves on all your key funds. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on. Prudent fiscal policies. Monitor and control your revenue and expenses. Keep manageable productive debt. Productive being the operative word. There's certain things you do not want to issue debt for, particularly if it doesn't add to your long-term ability to sustain your tax base. And that's an important point. Be financially compliant. That is the primary role of the city auditor's office to make sure that happens. Have transparent strategic planning. But remember, it's not just about spending. It's about planning and managing the money during the spending process. Most of what I'm going to talk about today is about the appropriated budget and where we're at. The mid-year review was to kind of give you an idea where we're at financially. This one is where we're at looking into next year. That being said, I refer a lot to the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association. It's the United States and Canadian organization of your fiscal officers in our two countries. It's a well-respected, well-thought. Their boards put a lot of time and energy and effort into best practices. And one of the big things here is that we got ourselves to where we've got a pretty solid budgeting process. It works very, very well. We've got a capital plan that, going clear back to the 80s, we did a 5-year projection on the capital plan. And as you know, even through today, updating that 5-year plan and including a few aspects longer than 5 years has become part of it. That's an important part of what we do. And Council recently just completed adopting a high-level strategic plan. What we're now missing is a long-term results evaluation process and a tie of that into financial planning long-term. So those are the next steps the council should be spearheading in developing a full financial picture for the city of Findlay. This is important, and I talked with Law Director Feiner about this a few days ago, and I share this primarily for the benefit of the folks who are running today. The roles of your elected offices. Under Ohio law, we're all equal, no matter what anybody infers or anybody thinks. Each position is independent, and nobody is subservient to another elected official. We all have our roles within the statutes. That being said, the director of law keeps Findlay within the legal boundaries. The city auditor keeps Findlay within the legal financial boundaries. Council sets local laws and funds the spending priorities that it deems appropriate for its constituents. And the mayor administers the city using the above parameters. That is the traditional role in a statutory city per the statute. Any questions so far? Good. Keep moving. And this isn't going to take too long. I think we'll be done fairly quickly, unless we do get into some big questions. What are economists talking about nationally that's relevant to us? And I'm going to step away from this mic for a minute, so I hope they can hear me out there in internet land. One, they're talking about a high probability of stagflation. For any of us that remember Jimmy Carter, we remember stagflation. Sorry to date a couple of us in the room. Stagflation is not a good thing. It's high rates, high interest, inflation running rampant. It does some terrible things. And the persistent inflation as it relates to what's going on with the tariffs it's very important that we keep that in mind, particularly with regard to some of your larger operations like water and sewer and your capital infrastructure for your streets, that type of thing. Increasing trade policy uncertainty, a potential weakening job market, a potential for a recession. But I think we talked about that a year or two ago too. They were saying, we might be having a recession coming up. You never know. Unusual impacts of a government shutdown. We're not, in my office, feeling any impacts from the government shutdown today. A few years ago we did. It delayed reimbursements on some debt that we had. It also impacted our ability to pay certain fees. We don't know what's going to happen, for example, with maybe the Social Security office and some of the other withholdings and things that we do that are federal rather than state related. In Ohio, Jobs Ohio just put this out, literally I think a week ago. Said we're going to see slower but resilient growth. Manufacturing faces challenges from the trade uncertainty. Labor market, it's got mixed signals in the labor market here in Ohio. But their strategic investments their approach is attracting the type of investment the state wants. Now, there's a lot of controversy over that. Matter of fact, I think the next big one, and there's been some articles written recently, they're talking about passing some legislation to allow your smart thermostat, your smart meter, to be controlled by the electric company. That's a whole world I don't want to get into, but basically what they're talking about is the demand on the electric grid with regard to the data centers and some of the high electric users that are being recruited to come into the state. Then the housing market is stabilizing. They're seeing investor activity. There's a lot going on there. The state's looking at that very, very closely as well. The one thing I didn't put up here, and I thought about it, Senator McCauley, who's Senate president, talked at the Republican meeting the other day about the fact that they're very worried that the initiative to remove real estate tax is going to make it to the ballot. So the state is making a major effort right now to create concessions and working with that group to try and satisfy them enough so they don't work incredibly hard to put that initiative on the ballot. For us, it's between 2 and 3 million in revenue. Obviously, it's a huge amount of revenue for the schools, but it would impact us if something happened with that. So keep that in mind. So it wouldn't be a small amount to make up. But where it would really impact us is what would the funding balance be? So if that makes it on the ballot in 26, you folks who are coming in and who are still going to be around may have to answer some questions as to long-term how we want to approach the relationships with the schools and the county in terms of making sure we can all stay fully funded and keep the local taxpayer happy and pleased with our services.
So, Jim, are you saying that the Trump tariffs are raising your concern about inflation? Is that what that second bullet is saying?
I don't think I said that I had a concern about it. I think I said that's what the economists are saying. They're saying that the tariffs may impact inflation in ways that they haven't anticipated. It's definitely on economists' minds. I just came back from the Ohio GFOA meetings week before last. It was, if there was an economist speaking, they brought the tariffs up for sure, because they don't know what the impact's going to be.
But this is your presentation. Are you are you saying this as you have a inflation concern for the budget for 26?
I think you'd be foolish not to have an inflation concern for the budget in 26 or 27, particularly when, as I mentioned earlier, when it comes to capital purchases. So how much of the major items that we buy for the water plant, the sewer plant, other infrastructure that we're putting in comes from and is manufactured in the United States? Do we have a percentage on that? No. But if it's not built here, it's going to have a direct impact on what it costs you. And I had an interesting conversation with a couple folks who rent here in town and work in a couple of the manufacturing facilities. And one's a distributor to manufacturers. So they, like everybody else, and what the economist had mentioned, sales bulked up. Sales looked really good a month or two before the tariffs went into place because everybody stocked up, thinking that all these deals were going to get put in place, particularly with China. It didn't happen. And so the tariffs stayed in place. They had all this stock at or all this, merchandise stock at an inflated price, and they began to liquidate it, sell it down, and get back to work. So there's been an impact from it, absolutely. But that's part of the purpose of it too, isn't it? To bring manufacturing back to the United States. So in terms of economic development, one of the things you guys have an influence on, Grant, is what type of economic development we should be zoning for, encouraging, recruiting, making sure that it's high-tiered enough and resilient enough that we can take advantage of the new things that are happening in this country as those things develop, if it does come to fruition the way the federal government has envisioned it. That would be my take. Any other questions about this slide? Thanks. Just so you know, in terms of our employee count, I actually started this years ago because we were worried about exodus. How many people were leaving the city's employment? There was some concern that we were pushing people out, or we weren't paying things good, or you're paying under if people are leaving and taking other jobs. But what's interesting is if you compare us to 2020, now we have 323 full-timers compared to 318 in 2020, 355 FTEs. It's relatively the same. It's a few more. 17 electeds. That's not going to change. That's set by statute. 10 people retired so far this year, and 13 resignations. Notice the bump from last year. Part of that was due to the wage increases and the things we saw where people were able to take advantage of some of those things in terms of their severance payouts and some other things. But it's not very much higher than we normally see. So that speaks well of where we're at. So, and not many retiree hires. I think that's more common, or used to be more common in the county. All right, this is a trend line. I thought this was interesting. And when I do my forecasting, I take a look, and you want to break your budget down into two areas of control. We're going to talk about that later, but personal services and other, and then capital projects are the three areas where council gets to decide how much money is spent. You don't decide down to the line item typically, but your level of control. If you authorize money in personal services, the administration can spend it within those personal service parameters. The thing was, personal services is our largest expense in the general fund. Our largest revenue to the general fund is the income tax. So I want to show you the trend. Of course, when we had the sale of Speedway and Cooper, we had huge bumps in business net profit tax. It was anomalous. We knew it was short-lived. The interesting thing, though, and you kind of eyeball it. I didn't paint the trend line on here, but if you eyeball the trend line, we're definitely budgeting a much larger gap in terms of our income tax coming in and the personal service costs going out. Back in 2005 and 2006, this was our leading indicator for the problems we had. So this is early. It's not a criticism, it's data only, and it's budget-based. It's not actual-based, other than in '24. So we see that gap is definitely wider in '24 than it was any of these years, but it's there. For income tax to grow at the rate that you want, you need to do this in a non-anomalous way. So if it's averaging 1 to 3, you need to average 4 to 5. You average 4 to 5, that's partly economic development, it's partly raises in the economy, it's partly growth, pick your poison, but it's a combination of a lot of things. Plus you want your businesses to have regularly profitable years. We'll come back to that later, I'm sure. But this is important to know. So keep in mind the amount of money coming into general fund. You're 80% of your income tax after costs. So we take the income tax, net the expenses of collecting it off, then take 80% of that money and use it to pay bills. That 80% is not covering as much of the wages as it used to, which means you have to make it up other ways. General fund revenues to date, they're currently at 67% of the budget. That's behind where it typically is this time of year. The good thing though is your expenses are at 58% of the budget. They're normally about 61% of the budget when we roll around to this presentation, and they're at 58, so that's good. As I've said many times, the income tax receipts are tracking behind what was projected, and Mary's upgraded her projection. I am not going to change my projection on the income tax until at least the end of October. I want to see what these business receipts come in at by the end of the month, this month, for the estimated tax receipts. That's important. That's important every October, but this October it's more important than normal. Also, my office has a very limited view of how much more money the administration is planning on spending. So what we do through the budget process is we put out a request within the budget, our Munis system, Tyler's system, where when your department heads and their people are entering in how much money they want next year, they tell us how much they're going to finish using this year. Then we use that to calculate how much will be left over to contribute towards a carry forward for next year. So that's an important process that goes on. However, in the budget meeting that Ginger ran last week for the city, I stressed to the departments, it's very important this year that they really tighten down on that number. I mean, they're normally giving back somewhere between 2 and 3 million. They're big numbers that are coming back, but it inflates your look when you're sitting down looking at these budgets. And with such a large number of new council members coming in, we're hoping to give them tighter numbers at the end of this year, and that those department heads really crank down on that number, so it's a little more realistic. We also know your carry forward number is going to decline going into next year. So you started out a couple years ago. Well, I'll touch on it in a minute. We don't have to do that here now. Touch on it here. So January 1 of 24, you started the year with 30 million, 26 million this year. Right now, as of today, you're projected at 17.5. By definition, these are deficits. One's a budgeted deficit, one's an actual deficit. So I heard on the radio the other day, one of the forums, and there was a view that we haven't had too many deficit years. We've had a few. We've had a couple for sure, and we budgeted a couple. So we need to be leery about how we interpret that information from my perspective as your fiscal officer. Then the red bar down here is your minimum reserve. This is the positive story to tell. We went from 2 months up to 3 months minimum reserve, and I'll thank appropriations for that. That was a huge move for us, particularly going into the changes in our funds, how they look now, because that gives you quite a bit of buffer here. Now, when we talked to Andrew Brossart, talked to him the other day about how much carry forward, how much unappropriated balance are a lot of the comparable cities carrying, and he said they're wanting to carry 30, 40, even 50% if they can of their operations budget into January 1. They really like to do that if they could do it. And the strong financial ones are doing that. So we're in good shape. We have a fallback, and should next year's or the year after's budget creep into this red area, council's ordinance or resolution says that along with the budget plan, the administration has to propose a recovery plan for that cash to get above that minimum. So that's an important fact to know here. The nice thing is, operationally speaking, we've been able to cash flow most years. We didn't cash flow back in 17, and again, we didn't. And last year, we turned in so much at the end of the year. We were able to protect that. And I think that's going to be very difficult to do this year. We shall see. This is just another way to look at the same information, just expanded out a little different way. All right. This is the one we got to talk about. So your income tax, the majority of it's withholding. Then there's individuals who pay taxes. A lot of times it's your one-off entrepreneur or that. And then the business, the net profits tax. Look at that volatility. So we had a rule, Rich Rowe, when he was a city councilman, wisely said, we're going to predict an average amount of business net profits tax. And then anything that comes in above that, we're going to move over to capital improvements so that we don't spend it on continual operations costs. That it's spent one time on a capital project and that we don't incur additional costs on one-time money. And it was a good thing. It was a trade-off, though. That rule went away when we got rid of the estimated payments, the forgiving estimated payments, and the stuff that was going on a few years ago. So as this business tax comes in, these windfalls are going directly into your general fund, which is okay. But now, if you look at this, we came in over 13 million a couple of years ago. We're projected this year originally, based on Mary and the income tax department thought, to come in around 6. And I had told council early on, I was concerned about that number because there was no precedent for it. If you take the trend line for the business income tax, the net profits tax, it trends at just under 4 million. That's what it should have been this year. But Mary has insight I don't have. We talked about it, and we ended up going with the 6 number. And Mary just revised her projection down. And because mine's not revised, I'm using the original, but she's revised it down to just under 4 here. So that line's going to come down significantly this year. It will likely, unless we learn something that I'm unaware of in the next few months, it will likely be the same or about the same the following year. And we'll have to see the impact of the change in administrations on the net profits. But we know Mary's revised her income tax, and the report, I think is in tonight's packet, shows that it's down significantly. Any questions about the business tax or the other income tax stuff? All right. General fund subsidy. Now, 3 out of the 4 of these are what we call enterprise funds. They're supposed to cash flow by definition under the Ohio statutes. That would be parking, pool, and airport. Well, we regularly subsidize the pool. Council took a position that was important years ago, that there'd be a place for folks to go to swim, especially folks that didn't have access to clubs and whatnot. Parking, the changes in parking, are they done or are they finished tonight if you guys pass them? But the parking, there's an update. And
Third reading tonight.
Yeah, so that, we'll have to see the impact of that, because you not only you're changing the rates, but what we don't know is the assumption, if I listen to the discussion right, seems to be, we expect the number of fines to be relatively consistent, but the amount you're paying on the fine should go up. But by definition, a fine is a disincentive to the behavior, so we don't know what the counter to that will be. So we'll have to see how that balances all out. And 2 parking lots have gone over to the county, so we won't have that revenue. So we'll do the projections. We'll work with Rob Martin on anything he can share with me on those now that he's done his finals before you guys pass that legislation. And we'll see what that does to that subsidy for next year. Streets is your big one. Streets is not an enterprise fund. It wasn't designed to cash flow. Streets is designed to maintain the streets. Important point. And Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, but streets are very hard to keep up on. We've all been in communities where they're really bad. Matter of fact, Toledo, I didn't think was ever going to make any progress on theirs, and then they passed a huge tax levy just for streets. Amazing. So they're very burdensome to do, but according to the state auditor, in the life of pavement, you might be able to argue it's somewhere between 15 and 20 years. The state tends to use 15. Some people use 20, and it depends on how they're doing it, if they're mixing in old aggregate and different things. But in theory, you should be replacing 6 to 7% of your streets every year. That's very hard to do in terms of lane miles. We don't generally accomplish that. So inherently, and the state comments on it in the state report, we're behind on some of our capital infrastructure. Streets are probably one of them. They're probably the most visible that people see, but that doesn't mean we're not doing a good job. It just means it's very expensive and very difficult to keep up on the long term. And we need to be aware of that as we're thinking about how we're gonna allocate capital monies moving forward. The airport, there's a big influence here. There was a huge cash subsidy to the airport this year that did not get spent. So this year, currently 25, there was no subsidy, but that was primarily because of the huge subsidy the year before that rolled forward in terms of how they manage their operations. So those are your subsidies. All subsidy money comes out of the general fund. So if you're doing things in these 4 areas and you're increasing those costs, you're reducing dollars or taking the money out of the general fund. All right. Unspent appropriations. Year-end projected cash balance of the water fund is $5.3 million versus the operations budget for 2025 of $10.1 million. So it's at 52%. Talked about that number earlier. Year-end projected cash balance of sewer, WPC, is $16.1 million right now, against a 2025 operations budget of $6 million. It's potentially indefensible, but hang tight. Year-end projected cash balance of the stormwater restricted account is $2.2 million versus an operations budget of $345,000. Again, potentially indefensible. However, I sat with Jeremy a couple weeks ago. The long-term control plan, the master plan for WPC and the water funds are likely to be completed by the end of 26. So although the fund balances point to an opportunity for a rate reduction or a significantly expanded, fully planned and executed capital program, we need to see the results of those studies before decisions are made. But I feel, in terms of looking at it, we have to be careful because there's talk about moving forward with some rate increases, but I think we need to be very cautious about it, particularly with sewer, with those kind of balances, until we see at least part of that plan come back. Once completed, the plans and a 5-year pro forma on each system per council's existing rules should be shared with the elected officials, which was the intent of council's rule. So council has a rule in place that says all enterprise funds are supposed to have a 5-year pro forma that's updated annually. All right, as we talked or inferred, there's a difference between a budgeted deficit and actual historic performance. This is important because I heard something else on the forum the other day that bothered me a lot. The state auditor's financial indicators infer that more money should be allocated to capital improvements. Currently, it's 20% of your net income tax receipts. But the auditor state does not review or comment on deficit budgeting. If cash balances are available to legally adopt the budget, they don't care. You can't presume us getting a clean audit means you're spending money wisely, and don't ever presume it. That's a huge mistake. They do analyze the major financial indicators, and we're gonna touch on that in a minute. Capital projects report is currently a good barometer for council to monitor unspent appropriations. And we're gonna talk about that a little bit more in a little bit, but that's a base part of the financial report I give city council every month. Shows you how much money you've appropriated, how much is incurred in PO, and how much remains unencumbered. This is the state financial indicators off this last audit. So, we had some years we've done pretty good, but more recently, in the last 2 years, reduced income is being flagged, deficit spending is being flagged by the state auditor. So you have the state auditor who has affirmed we are deficit spending. And year after year after year, they're saying, you really need to look at your capital. That the numbers indicate we're short on our capital spending. And that's important.
I would just note, because we can't see the little detail, but 1, 2, and 9 are all looking at prior, like year-over-year comparison. So given that our income tax spiked and then has come back down, we knew that would be a trend down. Same on.
That was good, that was good 2 years ago. That didn't apply this year. So this year, it's coming down, and we see it. It's down below the norm in one case particularly. Like, so we gotta be careful again what we infer. We don't wanna spend, we just wanna present data. All right. Right now, the 26 and 27 capital improvement allocation needs to be determined tonight before you leave, before this meeting at 6. Not leaving the stage until you tell me what it is. Traditionally, general fund got 80% of the income tax, and capital improvements got 20%. Historically, it's been as high as 75-25, but historically for years, it was 78-22. So, council needs to determine this allocation today, or I can't move forward with the budget process from the revenue side, because it's part of the budget process. And we can come back to that in a minute. Okay, in terms of revenue projections, I chuckled a little bit earlier this year. When we project revenue, and I say right in the budget book, I can't project grants. I don't know what grants we're applying for. I ask the administration every year, hey, you know what grants? And I think just a couple weeks ago even, Christina said, oh, you know, we don't know what we're applying for, what, we can see what's available, and that's fine. But there's nothing in the budget for grants. There's nothing in the budget for reimbursements that we get, some small, some large. Undisclosed processes by the administration. In other words, if I send emails every year saying we're doing the budget, if you're going to change a process, please make us aware of it. We were not aware that the parking fund was being looked at until budget night in December. That's important because it impacts our ability to project revenues. So we need a lot of information here. We've already mentioned the mayor's state. She's going to provide us cash flow and payout projections so that we can improve revenue on the investments. But there's not a lot of margin there because we're getting a good return. And more importantly, the DDA balance, the demand deposit account that we're using, will not be as low as been suggested by some folks because we need to diversify to protect the ability to pay our bills should there be a cyber incident at one of our other money holding investments. So Star Ohio or Fifth Third at this point in time, if one of those gets hacked, locked up, ransomware, you have to be able to pay our bills. It's that simple. But that doesn't mean we don't look to get the best return we can. A 5-year performance should be complete concurrently with budgeting for the airport parking funds per council's rules and shared with Findlay's elected officials, as I mentioned earlier. Appropriations Finance Committee should meet just after the new year to discuss using the unencumbered balance, our carry forward, to consider calling the $3.6 million in outstanding general obligation, what we call GO debt, that can be called in 2026 in July. If we don't call that debt, It runs through 2033. If we call that debt and we pay it off, the initial calculations are we can save about $450,000 over the life of that loan. It wouldn't be a refinance, it would be a payoff.
What's the interest rate on that?
It's depends on which bond you're calling. So it varies over the life of the bonds, but I think they're as high as 7 on some of the ones towards the end of the loan. So, and that would be what this meeting is for, to actually do that analysis. So, Rodney?
Quick question, who does the pro formas or the hypotheticals? We do that in-house or we hire somebody?
On bonds?
Yes.
I work with bond counsel. Yeah. Yeah, that's part of our function. And when we issue the bonds, we do the initial calculations. What we don't have at that point in time is what the current rate environment is, and so what the difference is. So here we are, we're in a rate environment that's anticipated to be declining, and we have bonds that we know are gonna climb in terms of the payout costs. So that margin there, if we can save that interest, there's value there that we can choose to save. But to do it, you're gonna have to invest up to $3.6 million in your general fund, unappropriated balance. So it'll be a good mathematical discussion for anybody who wants to sharpen their pencils and talk numbers. Okay. The 2026 and 27 budgets will be created simultaneously. Under Ohio law, I can only adopt, the city, can only adopt 1 year's budget. That's statute. It's silly. As a matter of fact, I've been talking to legislators. There is being some consideration of causing them not only to allow a 2-year budget, but even a 5-year forecast requirement, much like you have to do for the schools. I think that would be phenomenal if the state did that. But this process shows the short-term sustainability of the current budget. So for the folks coming in, I'm happy to say you can look at the 2025 budget book, which is online. If you don't want to look at it online, you can get a copy from me in the office. And you can see that our budget works going into next year. And the budget generally doesn't change dramatically through this process from year to year because we've looked ahead. And it shows us windows in areas that may be a problem. Council, we still got to affirm the capital improvement allocation. We can come to that in a little bit. Currently, though, you need to know the wage tables due to the reduction in income tax and whatnot are being calculated at 0%. So we're calculating no raises for the employees this year or next year, and that's what contracts call for, that they have with the unions. Generally, you guys have followed the union contracts to the regular employees. All right, let's talk about the budget meeting, and then ultimately we gotta talk about what you guys are gonna do with capital. Currently, a one-night abbreviated review of the budget is scheduled for December 9th, beginning at 4 p.m., subject to confirmation. But I wanna share something with you. Think about it. The city's budget exceeds well over $100 million. Well over, closer to 130 than 100. Council's level of control is over 3 categories: personal services, other expenses, and capital projects. But as an example, last year you had a department with an $11.8 million budget. The budget meeting allocated 15 minutes for it. They didn't even talk, I don't think, 10. Once you pass that spending, those personal services and other, there's no continuing review by council, and council has given the authority for the entire amount to be spent, irregardless of whether you expect it to be returned or not. The authorization is there to spend it, every last dollar. So the last several years, the budget has been reviewed in an abbreviated single evening session. My question for this group, and it's rhetorical, is council giving the budget the attention it requires and deserves? Food for thought. And in line with that discussion, what's the city of Findlay's contingency plan for tight monetary times and unexpected circumstances? Spend a lot of time. Jeff can attest to, and Grant can attest to how many times I've come and asked to bolster reserve funds, bolster the self-insurance fund, bolster different things, increase the minimum reserve. We've done good at level 1 budget budget reserve. But we don't have any contingency plans. We don't have a priority list. We don't have any way, council has never discussed in my tenure as city auditor, the next levels of protecting itself should those monies begin to go south. And to have those priorities, at least a discussion of those priorities in place. And think about it. The recession happened in 2007 and 8. The city didn't see the hit until almost 2010. And why? Because people pay their taxes, last year's taxes this year. There's an inherent 1 to 2 year lag before you see the impact on your budgets. So you can feel like you're doing okay through a recession, which is happening. And then you get slammed because you didn't expect the size of the downturn to happen when you do finally get the numbers and are able to analyze it. So food for thought, and tie that in again to what the state auditor is saying. The state auditor is starting to say, we're starting to show some areas where we should be paying some attention in terms of our budgeting process. It's not a criticism, just a state high-level analysis of what the numbers tell them. And the state goes out of their way to say this isn't a criticism, this is just our numbers say, based on everything we've done across every municipality in the state, these are the areas we monitor, and here's where we see people start to get in trouble when these areas start to turn yellow and red. Fortunately, we have no red ones. And I don't think, maybe the first year we might have had a red one, but I don't think so. All right. The last thing I'll share here is having an item listed in a budget or capital plan should not exclude it from a proper review process by council with regard to the city's strategic and long-term financial plans, as well as the current funding priorities. And again, that's part of your long-term financial and your results evaluation process that revolve around these 3 hubs of budgeting. So that being said, capital allocation. So Grant, if you're in charge of this meeting, what I need to know before I leave tonight is what number I should use. Am I using the 20%? Am I using something different? And then ultimately, what's actually used will be decided when the budget is approved in January, but we need numbers to calculate numbers now.
Ms. Russell, if I may. Good to see you all. So I was hoping to, as you guys know, over the past year, I'd been working on trying to put together a financial pro forma and 5-year forecast that would be able to share with you guys to kind of talk about some of this. However, as we've been meeting with Councilman Wobser and the auditor, decided to hold off on that a little bit longer as we work through a couple of different things. With that, however, what I am recommending for the capital allocation is a bit of a shift, and I think I mentioned it at one of your meetings. I forget which one, but doing 10% of the income tax revenue rather than the 20. However, allocating the full amount of the hotel motel tax and the interest earnings towards capital. And that really came at a recommendation in a conversation I had with Andrew Brossert. He said that typically he recommends that the more variable revenue sources be directed to capital, because then you're able to adjust as you see the numbers come in more easily, where those more stable revenue sources, obviously keeping towards operations, your more consistent expenses. So with that, Jeremy, Rob, and I have looked through it, and those revenue sources, we feel that they will continue to keep us very close to what we have seen the last 3 years in our capital allocation, but just kind of a different way to skin the cat. So that is what I would be recommending, is 10% of the income tax towards capital, and then hotel motel tax and interest earnings.
I want to chime in here because I've had a couple of conversations with Brossard, and we have to be very careful of that relationship, and we have to nurture that relationship. It took a long time because of the level of client that firm works with. One of his concerns, though, is he's not endorsed that. He's maybe talked about it in passing. He's been very clear there has been no in-depth discussion of that. And if there is an in-depth discussion of that, it should happen in the meeting like we're talking about with, that we've had with Jeff and the committees. We have to be careful not to lay ideas out as vetted ideas when they've not been thoroughly vetted. But I understand where you're should not cage it in a manner that says the municipal advisor is advising that, because he's absolutely not advising.
Thank you for your input. That is my recommendation to council.
Mayor, do you have some basic numbers around that?
Yeah, so the income tax obviously would be based off of the auditor's projection. If we look at, next year's revenue projections, which it would be very similar to this year's income tax allocation, obviously just 10%. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. With the interest earnings, obviously it fluctuates a bit. Right now, I think year to date, we're at like 1.8 million. And then the hotel motel tax, I think, is typically between $600,000 and $800,000. So in total, when we looked at next year's projections, I think it would be close to $4.9 million. And that's very similar to what we've seen. We've fluctuated the last couple of years between, I think, 4.7 and 5.2 for the capital appropriation that has actually occurred. And then we always try to keep 500 to $1 million in the capital fund going year to year so that we have that starter money for projects.
Here's what you need to be aware of that goes directly to that question. The money we made in '25 was based primarily on the balances we obtained in '24 through our investments in the economy. Moving into '25, we see a decline in that, and we expect a further decline in that. As compared to water and sewer and the other funds that receive interest. When Ginger does that calculation, it's a weighted calculation based on the amount of money in each of those funds. So as the amount of money in general fund declines, and it's likely going to be close to half of what it was 2 years ago, that number will drop by half, or as much as half.
I'm basing the
So-
number only off of the interest earnings allocated to the general fund.
That could, again, that's history. Moving forward, that number is going to shrink significantly because the balance of the general fund has dropped significantly. So in other words, you can't use a prior year interest calculation to calculate the amount going forward. It has to be based on the anticipated balances that are there and a weighted rate, and some of those assumptions we're talking about agreeing.
Yep, we
What
understand it would fluctuate.
What is the frequency of the hotel motel bed tax receipts coming into the city? Is it a monthly, quarterly?
Those come in monthly. There's a 10% administrative fee off the top. They shrunk quite a bit this year due to the permanent residents in the hotels. It's about, it's been as high as $800-some thousand. It's been as low during COVID. It was horribly low. It was half that, I think it was. But it does come in monthly.
And one of my long-term goals with the hotel motel tax money is, that is primarily generated related to tournaments and folks coming and visiting a lot of times. So long-term, I would love for pretty much that to be an allocated source just towards parks and recreate and cube development, because that is a large generator. So I would love for it to kind of be a targeted reinvestment tool. Obviously, that's a couple years out, but I think that kind of moves us towards that.
Now, you have an opportunity, because you have so many new members coming in, to continue the way you've done it, and let the new members look at it, analyze it, take a look at how the revenues are coming in, and if that is the wise way to do it, and allow them to have a meeting with the municipal advisor, and whoever the new chair of appropriations or finance is, to allow them to take a look at it. Changing something this dramatically, I don't know if there would be unintended consequences of not having analyzed it, but it's something that is worth a roundtable discussion to do.
In previous years, we used Paul Schmelzer called it the known dollars concept. You'd go halfway through the year and see where we were doing, and then make one-time allocations from general fund to capital. If the general fund was, if things were going well, is that something that you would foresee doing in this situation to bolster, like to do our add-on streets or bolster capital throughout as the year progressed, or is that not under consideration?
Obviously, that's always on the table. Our desire would obviously be to work within the parameters of the capital dollars going into that fund. But as we see, when things come up, we tap into the general fund and have that conversation. And, you know, I was, again, trying to have this conversation way earlier in the year to work through this process, but with some of the delays of getting together the forecast, it just wasn't a feasible conversation prior to that.
The other thing we want to make sure, there is some discussion of potentially doing some debt not too far down the road and some other things. That whatever is done is very well thought, very well reasoned, and that reasoning is put on paper, put down in writing. Because it's gonna have to be explained to Moody's, it's gonna have to be explained to S&P, Fitch, if we're going out there and we're gonna ship that. We have a couple other significant questions, that I won't answer this time. But to do it spur of the moment, or do it in a manner where there isn't a documented process, review process, of legislative authority, could put us at some risk, so.
Let's just proceed with the 20-80 split. That's fine. I, you know, have been trying to have this conversation all year, so this may not be the time with all the turnover to make the change, but please note that, I guess, new council think that that is a wise methodology to move towards in the future, and we'll work through that process.
Are the hotel motel tax and the interest are two different streams of money, correct?
Yes, and what I'd probably do, depending how you guys see this tonight, I would probably add those revenue streams as line items in one of the reports. Some way to give you guys a way to monitor it
Not a
as
bad
we
idea.
progress. Yeah.
So, over the years, I've been suggesting that we needed to increase our capital spending. I think we're behind where we need to be. It's not an issue of spending. Jeremy can certainly spend it, if we give it to him. I would suggest that we stick with 20% plus the hotel motel tax, because I think that's a good idea from Andrew, to put in the variable amount in there, takes it off the board from the general fund then, and gives it as an incremental amount in capital that can be used to promote things that are very important for the city, and I think we need to increase that amount.
I appreciate that feedback, and as you know, I want to increase the capital expenditure as well, but recognizing that we had to make a significant investment in our people last year, and our revenue is stabilizing, and the economic uncertainty, I think that we would need to do it as one-off in allocations to capital. I don't think that we would be able to, I don't think it would be wise to take that revenue out of the general fund right now until I have more clarity on what we're going to see with property tax, what we're going to see with wage increases. Obviously, we have some businesses that are coming in and that we're hoping to see in the near future, but until we see that, I want to see a little better margin on the general fund before we would commit to that.
But we know what our wages are gonna be within 1% or 2 for next year.
We're starting that process right now to work through the details of those, but yes, overall, that's pretty set.
Yeah, so to me, understand, Mayor, I'm just coming at this from a different direction. I think we need to invest more into the city infrastructure, and we know what our cost for our personnel is gonna be. That was a given when Rob negotiated the contracts, and we had to go forward with that. So I think we need to budget around that money. We're gonna have less, there's no doubt. We have unknowns coming up through the end of October, when, with the business withholding, we could see some adjustments there, let's hope. But, you know, nobody's hoping that hard, that it's gonna increase too much more. So, I think we've got some serious, looking to do as far as our budget goes forward. And that's why I'll go back and state it again. I said this last year, and I'll say it again this year. I hope we see a balanced budget come at us this year. If we have the money, when it comes through, and if you need the money, if any of your people need money, we'll give them the money. My concern with continuing to have budgeting the way that you've done it, the way Lydia and Paul did it, is it just puts us at risk, from my perspective, quite honestly, Mayor, if you're not here.
You planning to off me, Jeff?
I am
Are
not.
you concerned?
That is not, do not move with the Virginia Attorney General candidate. I'm not threatening anybody. But that's a concern, right? Because if something happened with you, regardless of what it was, those monies are appropriated, that next person, John, would step in. Hello, John. And he could spend all that money.
No,
Doesn't
I
have
won't.
to ask us.
No, I won't.
You don't know that, John.
So I understand, and I think that there's a balance, and we have really been pushing the departments all year to find ways to batten down the hatches, to make sure that they refine those budget numbers. But I also think that our community expects a level of service that we are able to provide with them because we give managerial discretion to our departments to see an issue and fix it without having to come and ask mom and dad for permission. And so we have created a culture where they take on that responsibility. And yes, we may put less dollars into capital investments on an annual basis, but I would put up the condition of our roads and infrastructure up against any community that has an even semi-reasonable, if we talk about Dublin or New Albany, they're in a league of their own. But we maintain our stuff very well, and that's because we are planning, we're maintaining, we're not just replacing. And we're able to stay on top of it. So do I want to continue to increase our capital allocations? Definitely. And we can work with the 20/80 split. And as we see what next year's revenue numbers come in at, then we can look to adjust and add more money towards the capital. But I would say right now, I think both keeping the 80/20 and then diverting $800,000 out of the general fund would be challenging.
Do we have any outstanding financial obligations for flood mitigation for the bridge? Any matching funds or payments that we have to make in 26 or 27?
Not that are anticipated at this point in time. All those funds have been restricted.
Okay.
Yeah, so really all the big things on the horizon that are anticipated have been set aside. Obviously, as we move through the process with the downtown recreation area, that could be one where we would take general fund dollars that are currently unappropriated, or capital dollars, or debt issuance. There's lots of different variables as we move through that process, but we need more information before I can make a recommendation on how we'll manage each of those. But when we come to look at the general fund, our team does a really good job of managing the dollars, but the margins are definitely more thin, and so we're managing those each and every day. And I think we see the dividends in how our community is maintained and the work that our team does. We're a service organization, and so investing in our people is our top priority.
On the 10% plus the hotel, motel, plus investment income that you proposed, if you looked at your guesstimate on total dollars, what would that kind of come in percentage-wise if we just did that? What would be the equivalent sit?
It's right about right now, as I look at the numbers, kind of looking at past, looking at forward, it's right around $4.9 million. So that would be pretty much the same as the 20% allocation. So we're not decreasing the number, we're just changing the source and allowing us a little more flexibility. So it's really not a big deal. We can stick with the 80/20 if that makes more sense for a new council coming in. We certainly don't want any documentation changes. That was something that I had a discussion on, and I thought it was a good way to allocate, to provide more predictability, but that is fine.
And I want to make sure the door doesn't get closed, because first quarter, we definitely have a big issue to talk about with the potential call on the debt. We'll know how it closed out on the revenue overall. And like I say, for the new council, it gives them a chance to use that time. And
Yep.
to a good issue, to really get an understanding of it. So we can get the numbers from our office, I hope, in terms of where we're at on the revenue side.
Yeah, no,
I guess I like the concept of putting the variable money, the revenue towards capital. That makes a lot of sense. But to ask us to make that change tonight with nothing in front of us is really, and I would like to have Andrew weigh in on that. I think that's an important step, So I just don't, to ask us to make, I think we have to default to the 80/20, in
No,
my opinion.
that is fine, and
for
I
tonight.
completely
but
understand.
I am supportive. The concept makes sense, and we should pursue that. And I don't. What would we consider changing mid-year? When we say, or
You've had years, it also gives me an opportunity to bring in a history of the income tax and how it's reduced, because it was originally for, I think, sewers. operations
Oh,
while
okay.
you try to fix it.
Okay.
But, you know, you don't, that's very short.
I hate to see us mid-year going through another, I mean, that's just a lot of effort.
7 even, yeah, you'll have plenty of time.
I think that would be the goal. I mean, I think let's just prepare to do that.
Yep, that's
you know.
fine.
I mean,
Yep, again, I tried to start the conversation back
Yeah.
April, May, so we just
Why-
didn't get it, and
why
that's all
why
right.
did it never got traction? I guess they're just
A variety of reasons
that we're not going to talk about.
we don't need to get into.
I understand. Okay, so all right.
Jeff, yeah, go
I would
ahead.
make a motion that I still think we need to, and we'll take the motel tax out of it because we don't have the exact numbers, but I still think we need to increase. I'd make a motion that we put 22% towards capital CIT and 78 for general fund.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for a 22%.
Well, how did we-
Excuse me. We have a motion and a second to allocate 22% of income tax to SIT. So that's on the table. Discussion, Mr. DeArmond.
So I don't know what that 2% does. I mean, I guess what does that do to the operation side of it? I mean, it seems like a big decision with no paper in front of me to analyze this. That seems, I'm not in favor of that,
Again,
that motion.
For budgeting purposes, Dan.
Yeah, so the budget, staying 22%, that then when the auditor is doing his projections on the revenue, he goes in and says, 20%, or 20% or 22% of whatever comes in income tax is going directly to the capital
understand.
fund.
I understand
And
that.
that 78% is going to general fund. Now, I think the big distinguisher here is that the 20% is the allocation. We have the ability, as we have done. Last year, we did an additional $1.6 million towards a fire truck. It gives us flexibility. I would prefer it stay at the 80-20 because that allows us a steady amount that we've been working with. And then we come to you all as things come up and make additional investments. Additionally, I would mention that for a couple years there, for whatever reason, the resurfacing that was occurring was coming out of our capital budget. That has now been moved back fully into the SCM&R fund as R&M, road for maintenance. And so we have been able to increase, as you drive around town, I'm sure you are seeing all the cones. And so, we have been able to increase in different ways. So we, in essence, last year, we spent $400,000 additional dollars in road maintenance through capital and then the R&M. So we have been increasing the allocation and investment we're making in capital.
So if you did the 22%, can you allocate it back if
No.
the general, okay,
You can't move the money back, you can change the allocation.
you can change the so
In other words,
does that,
so I close, let's say, in March, we close March, and revenues look in a way that you want to go back to 80-20. Then you would have a meeting, appropriations and finance committee, have a meeting, make that recommendation, you guys pass it, the minute it becomes legislation, you would make it for April on. Then when I do those calculations, I have to adjust it. I do it by ordinance, so whatever your ordinance says is what I
Okay.
do.
Addition,
That's that ordinance.
it seems like it's easy to allocate it from general to capital. Is it just as easy from capital back? Okay, so then,
So-
that
so
so that
in
doesn't make
essence-
sense to do that then.
Change the allocation, so less goes into capital.
I understand, yeah.
So we
Oh,
could
okay.
ch-
Oh, I see
so
what you're saying.
we could
Oh,
say-
okay, I'm sorry,
Same result, legal method.
yeah.
so in essence, we could say 20%, and then as we see how next year's revenue
Yeah.
comes in, then we could increase it mid-year as well.
But I agree with you, Mayor, but that also doesn't give Jeremy the ability to budget longer term when he ramps up his projects, knowing he's budgeted for the additional dollars and can look at XYZ project above and beyond where he normally would be.
Yeah, but the last couple of years, what we've been doing is we kind of have a pool of alternate projects that if things start coming in lower costs and we have additional funds, they're pretty much ready to slate. So that, the planning process is not a problem.
Dan, I would agree with you and the mayor. 80-20 is the smartest, easiest way to go, and we can always do the additional capital. And that's me agreeing with the mayor on that.
I know, thanks. Thank
Hey.
you. Appreciate it. Let this day
It's
go
a
down
new
in
day.
history.
I wouldn't have taken it less for you. The 80-20 has always been a smart, because we've always been able to appropriate, and we're still trying to figure out the payroll on our sacrifice public safety.
But we know what that is. We know
We're
what
still
that is.
trying to fill open positions.
So we have a motion and a motion for a 2278, or 22 to sit. Is there any other discussion on that motion? So with 8 council members here, John, are you a tiebreaker in this?
Well, yeah, if need be. You haven't voted yet.
Any other discussion on that? So all in favor of the 22% to sit, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
And those opposed say nay.
Nay.
So, quick, I heard it as a 3-5. Is that what everybody got?
Yeah.
Okay.
3-5
thank you.
in which
Yeah,
direction?
Niemeyer, Palmer, Wobser,
Okay,
ayes.
so-
Everybody else nays.
We're still looking for a motion. I'll make the obvious motion. We do it at a 20% to sit,
I'll second that.
and then discussion on that.
And I would just reiterate, last year, a $1.6 million fire truck, that's more than 25% of our normal capital budget. So we were well above a 20% allocation to capital investments, and we'll continue to make sure that we stretch every one of those dollars to invest in our community.
But we also don't buy fire trucks every year.
We better not. We can't afford to.
So discussion on the motion of a 20% to sit. Hearing none, all in favor of 20% to sit, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay.
Nay.
And so I heard that as a 6-2, confirmed by everybody. So let's, Jim, the number is 20%.
Very good.
The only
Thank you.
other question I have is, you can schedule one night of the budget. We have it scheduled for December, I think it's the 9th on your preliminary, you start at 4-ish. You want to stick with one night? Do you want any more in-depth than one night? If you do,
One night.
okay. Thank you. That's everything I need. Again, thanks everybody for your time and attention and interest in the subject. And if you have any questions, this will be posted online, if it's not already, by tomorrow morning under the city auditor's page on the City of Findlay website under pre-budget 2026, or budget meeting pre-budget 2026.
And with that, we'll call this committee of the whole meeting to close at 5:40. And for everybody at home, I think we're going to be back here in 10 minutes to start doing some public hearings. 2 public hearings at 5:50.